show, best-selling photo book author Lisa S. Johnson, a native of California and adopted Canadian. Having grown up in Alberta and British Columbia, she's going to share with us stories about her book, Immortal Axes, which features guitar photos from over 150 critically acclaimed rock stars. Lisa, welcome to the show, and thank you for being here. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me on, Guido. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, me too. Right on. Listen, I got to ask you something. Lisa S. Johnson, we share the same middle initial.
Okay.
I'm Guido Esperino. So are you willing to exchange the S's, or are we
Well,
keeping that
sure, but
in?
I don't think we have the same one. I'm Suzanne.
No, okay, we don't.
What's yours?
Salvatore.
Salvatore. Okay,
Yeah.
that's a good one.
Yeah, it's my grandfather's name. So I was
Okay.
thinking, I was gonna guess, I was like Lisa Samantha Johnson. I was thinking, is it Samantha? Anyways,
Now,
yeah.
my mom named me after Lisa, a character who was on As the World Turns,
No way.
her favorite opera. And I don't know where the Suzanne part came from, but I go by Lisa S. Johnson because there's actually another Lisa Johnson who's also blonde, living in Los Angeles, who's been photographing rock stars for eons. So we get confused all the time. And before I actually met her in person, I said to myself, I need to go by Lisa S. Johnson because I don't want people
Yeah.
still get confused even with the S in there, and at least it does help to differentiate a little bit. And I've since met her, and she's just awesome. I love her. I call her my Lisa Johnson sister.
That's awesome. And hey, here we are clarifying things on the monthly social, just like we always do. So
That's it.
unexpected, right?
Hmm.
Um, you recently wrapped up a tour, and we've been talking Canada here. You recently wrapped up a tour out in British Columbia and Alberta with the book. Um, is it fair if I say to you, how is it to be back in Canada?
Oh, I love it. I mean, I go back every year because my whole family lives there. So I usually go to Canada at least twice a year. And during COVID, it was really tough because I couldn't get back to say, be with my
Right.
family. But I happened back now, and it was really wonderful to be back. And the first thing I love to see as soon as you get in your car out of the airport or if you cross the border is a huge Canadian flag blowing somewhere. And my heart just swells because even though I was born in California, I
Yeah.
moved to Canada when I was 7 years old. So all my, formative years were in Canada, and so I feel Canadian, in my soul. But of course, I love the weather down here in the States. So
Yeah, I can't argue with that.
but you can't really, I don't think you compete. Maybe in Ireland and Europe, some areas you cannot compete with Canadian rockers, the spirit of Canadian rockers. And I grew up going to concerts at the Edmonton Coliseum, and my first one was Kiss, and Alice
Oh, no
Cooper
way.
was the second in the same summer. I was, I think, 12. And then the following one was AC/DC. And I never looked back. I've always been a classic rock junkie
You know
since.
what? It's funny you mentioned Alice Cooper. I never got to see Alice Cooper. I had tickets to see him, and I was with a group of friends, and one of the guys that we hung out with, he really wanted to see him, and he hadn't gotten a ticket. I think I was about 15 years old. I gave him my ticket. But
Oh
but
man.
but I never ever and then got to see Alice Cooper again. So anyways,
Yeah,
there's still
well,
time.
hey, he's
There's
still
still time.
touring.
Yeah,
There's
I was
still,
gonna say there's still time. I gotta catch him at some point.
yeah.
Hey, what's your favorite thing about Canada? Other than the rockers, what's your favorite thing about Canada?
Oh, the Rocky Mountains.
Rocky
I
Mountains.
grew I grew up skiing in Banff and
Really?
Jasper. Oh yeah, and also in Whistler. Used to love Whistler, skiing down the back bowls, all the double black diamonds. Yeah, I
I'm
loved
gonna
it.
have to reverse this. You're a Canadian and an adopted American. That we gotta reverse that intro. You talked about when you were 7. I hope I got this right. You grew up in Slave Lake. Is that it?
That is correct.
Alberta, on
Mm-hmm.
the Sawridge First Nation.
Yes.
How long were you there?
7 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
so you were 7 when you moved there, and you
Yeah.
stayed 7 years.
Yes, yes. It was
Wow.
very cold, and I did walk to school in waist deep snow. I can attest to that because, first of all, I was little, but second of all, so much snowfall up there and so freezing. One time we had to dig our house literally out of the snow. You had to dig your way out of the house, out of the door, and then you had to dig your car out from underneath the snow. And then the graders would come by and they'd get all the snow off the road, but you still had to dig your own car out, So
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty brutal. And my mom would wrap my head up in a with a scarf with just slits for eyes because you'd be like walking to school freezing, it'd be minus 30 or 40 below.
And
Brutal.
when you take that breath and you feel it freezing, right? Like you feel
You
the
know.
you
Oh yeah.
know, right?
Every hair in your nose freezes. It becomes an icicle.
Totally. So
Only Canadians
is
know that.
that your fondest memory of that area?
No, that would not be my fondest memory. I think freezing my ass off are my least fondest memories. I remember standing in Edmonton. I was working for the city hall as a secretary, and it was so cold waiting for the bus, and they'd have those radiating heaters inside there that
Right.
barely gave you any heat, you know. And I would stand there just shivering and thinking, visualizing in my head someday I'm going to move to the hottest place I can find. And I would visualize myself laying on the beach and like sizzling underneath the sun. And as soon as I got the chance to, I moved to Florida. And that's when I got out of Canada when I was 23.
Wow. Florida. Yeah, I love Florida. I think it's great weather and um yeah, I'd like to land there at some point. Just because of like you say, the weather, right? Like I know the winters and the snow and I enjoy the snow. I don't like cleaning the snow. Right?
Yeah.
I like playing in the snow, but cleaning the snow, it's painful. So help me make a bit of a connection here. When did you start getting into photography? And if you can, then I mean, you're in Canada, you're doing that, you stay there for 7 years, you end up in Florida at some point. When do you get in photography? Was there something that drew you to that?
Well, my father was an amateur photographer growing up, and he had professional cameras. He actually had all my family are hard workers. My dad had two and three jobs going at a time, and so he had his regular job, which was promoting a landscape in Alberta, in the province of Alberta. He started this whole thing called Stamp Around Alberta, and you got your little passport, and everywhere you went, there were certain places you'd go and you'd get a stamp. And then he also worked in a camera store because he was interested in photography. And so he could get discounts on cameras and gear and lenses and filters and stuff like that. And I remember he always had these cool filters and he photographed the eclipse. And he got great pictures. I still have those slides today of him photographing the eclipse. And I was always impressed by that. When I ended up in Florida, I had a job that transferred me down there. It was an administrative position. And soon after I left that job and I wanted to go to college for photography. I wanted to go to school. I needed to figure out what was my major going to be. And I noticed driving around, there were always billboards with images. Magazines had images. Every publication has images. And I thought, well, that might be a career because images are never going to go out of style. You're always going to need them, right? So I went to college for photography. And then I ended up getting a job working for this photo lab that didn't even have a sign outside because their work was primarily for aerospace companies. Down there in Florida, you've got Grumman, Raytheon, all these NASA, all these. So that was the company, that's the jobs that we did. And I had to have a secret clearance to handle all of their materials. It was classified. It was during the days of Joint Stars when Reagan was the president and they had the Joint Stars program where they put a radar gear and camera gear in the belly of aircraft and they would fly at nighttime over areas where we were having wars or what have you, doing reconnaissance. So we would get that film back, then they'd fly it back to the United States, land in the town I lived in, and bring all the film to us. And we'd have hundreds of sheets of film coming off of our processors with black blankets around it so nobody could see except for the people that had the clearances. So
Wow.
that job actually ended up landed me the job with Eastman Kodak. I got hired out of that job to move to Rochester, New York with that experience, and I became a technical sales rep for Eastman Kodak.
This is wild. I feel like I just went through like an X-Files vortex there, like
It's
classified.
pretty wild.
No one's gonna call me, right, Lisa, and say, "Hey, you can't put that on." Or
Yeah, you're good. It was a
wow,
long time ago.
wow, that's phenomenal. What a wild story.
Yeah, so I ended up working for Eastman Kodak, and that's where I truly learned photography. You know, you learn it in school, you learn technical things in school, but Kodak really put you to task, and you had to really learn the films and how to expose them, and for all different kinds of applications because there's portrait wedding photography that's
Right.
different from fashion photography, different from architectural photography. They all use different types of films and sizes of films, medium format versus 35 millimeter. And then we transferred into digital photography, so I had to learn all about that and photojournalism. And I ended up working in Memphis, Tennessee, and there I started going to the Unity Church. And the guitar player at church asked me out on a date on a picnic that they were having. And my father, growing up, he's a guitar player, and he said, "You cannot date musicians." So I never did. I was a good girl. I never dated any musicians. And so I call him up to confess kind of as a joke. I'm like, "Dad, I'm dating a musician. However, he is the guitar player at church, and he also owns a vintage guitar store." And my dad said, "Oh, well, that's different. He's not a touring musician. That's the kind you can't date. You can date this guy. And he's got a vintage guitar store. That's perfect. I've always wanted a Gibson mandolin. If he gets one in, let me know. I want to get it." So I said to my boyfriend then, I became his girlfriend, and I said, "Listen, if you get in a Gibson mandolin, let me know." And he actually did get in 1917 Gibson mandolin. I actually have it right below me
No
here.
way.
My dad just gave it back to me. I said, "Okay, I want to buy that for my dad. How much?" And he said, "You can't afford it, but if you photograph some guitars for me that I have to sell, that I don't want to sell, I'll trade you for the mandolin." So at that time, like I didn't have very much money, so I'm like, "Sure, let's do it." So I photographed these incredible vintage guitars for him, and I just remember opening the cases and smelling the patina and the inside of the case, and remembering that smell of my dad's case,
Huh.
my dad's gear. And I love that. And it brought me to my dad. And I knew that I felt like my dad would approve, of my photographing guitars, even though he wasn't thrilled that I'd gone to college for photography because he thought I was never going to make any money. But he was really pleased that I got this job with Eastman Kodak. So I was good now. So then I started photographing guitars. He just let me go to his shop and take any guitar down and bring it home and study it. That's what I did, testing films and just using the guitar as my subject matter. And I loved it. And then Kodak ended up moving me to New York City about 6 months after that happened. And I thought, I still want to keep photographing
Mm.
guitars. I may as well photograph famous guitars. Everyone comes through New York. So the Time Out magazine has the list of everything to do in town. I didn't know anybody. I was new in New York. And I saw that Les Paul played every Monday night at the Iridium Room. And I'm like, "Dad used to play Les Paul and Mary Ford all the time. I'm going to go see if I can meet Les Paul and photograph his guitar." So I went down to the Iridium Room, and I met the bass player Paul Nowinski. He was in the Les Paul trio at the time. And I said, "Hey, do you think Les will let me photograph his guitar? Here's some pictures I've taken of other vintage guitars." So he goes, "Let me go ask him." So he takes the pile of pictures and he goes back. 10 minutes later, he comes up to me and he goes, "Yeah, Les says you can photograph his guitar." I said, "Fantastic. The next time I come down, I'll bring my camera." So I did. And that was the first famous guitar I photographed was Les Paul's.
What
And
a so you blew my mind with that journey there. So you start off working in Kodak, and then you meet somebody, and you start photographing these guitars in the shop as a
yeah,
trade-off, and that was your gateway.
correct.
Just a, hey, just take these, and you can have this guitar for your dad. And then you actually, I don't know, you build up the gumption, the nerve, just like to just go, "Hey, I'm gonna go and see if I can film,
Yep.
photograph Les Paul's guitar."
Yep. That's
Took
exactly
took
how it
the
went
took the
down.
shot, and that was it.
I just felt like I felt compelled to do it. I'm like, "What's he going to say? Yes or no? It's going to
Right,
be one or the other." And so you use the word gateway. The true gateway was Les. He
right.
let me photograph his guitar. And after that, I would call up people I wanted to photograph the guitars, and I'd say, "I've worked with Les Paul, and I would really love, I have, his blessing." He ended up writing the foreword for my first book,
First book.
108 Rockstar
Yeah.
Guitars. And so it was like the gateway was there. They would say, "Oh, yeah, sure. We love Les. Come on over, photograph the guitar." So
So, Lisa, if Les isn't that first, isn't the gateway, you think you would have had that pathway still?
it would have been harder. I
Yeah.
think it would have been harder. I would have kept going. You know, I was compelled to do it. I really am in love with the sound of the guitar.
I
I
believe that.
was in love with
Yeah.
my imagery and how the shapes and how sexy the curves are of the guitar. I was compelled to continue to explore the how I could continue to photograph the guitar in different ways. And I got a feeling off of the guitars, especially these vintage guitars. You get a feeling off of them. Like they want to be photographed. They want to shine. They want to tell their story through the image, and they do. You can
You're giving me guitar chills.
I mean, even hearing myself talk, I get water in my
Yeah.
eyes because the guitars are so it's the great North American icon, you know, was invented in North America. And the sound of it moves us. It's, you know, just music is an international language. And so I would have kept going even if Les had said no, I would have kept going. But I think that by having that, I mean, just even having him write the foreword, I remember the night, it was 12 years after I'd photographed his guitar. And I sat in with him one night and I had all these 8.5 by 11 photographs of, I was flipping in front of him. I'm like, look, here's Zach Wilde's Les Paul. Here's Don Felder's Les Paul. Here's, um, you know, just everybody's Les Paul, Slash's Les Paul, and Ace Frehley's Les Paul. I go, you are their hero.
Right.
Wouldn't you consider writing the foreword for my first book? You're the first guy's guitar I photographed. And he goes, well, I see what you're saying. He goes, okay, I'll do it. I go, don't forget, Les. I'm not going to let you forget, you know, because, you know, he goes, I won't forget. He's like, call Michael tomorrow, who is his manager, and set it up. So I did, and we set it up. And sadly, he passed away about six
Yeah.
months after that happened, and
Wild.
he never got to see the book.
Oh,
But I did donate 10% of the proceeds of my first book to the Les Paul Foundation
wow.
for he gives to the hearing impaired. So
Good
it's
cause. Fantastic.
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm I'm deaf in one ear. So
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah.
see? So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
good.
I am.
Yeah.
And I deaf in one ear and I try to play guitar, so I always say here at home to my wife, I say, when did that sound okay? Because I don't,
Uh-huh.
sometimes the sound is off a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that what a phenomenal story, you know, with Les and all those iconic names that you're talking about their guitars. And it's funny you talk about the guitar and the style and how it flows. I always feel like when I go to a rock concert, and I love watching the guitarist because there's something about it. There's just something fluid or something transparent, but it just flows. And it's like I always look at the guitarist with their guitar, and they're one. You know what I mean? They just,
Yeah.
it's, I don't see a person and the guitar. I just see the guitar and what's coming out of it and the person. You know, it's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal feeling if when you
We
connect that
see the
way.
same way because you know because my father was a guitar player. I was always more interested in the guitar players when I'd go to a concert than
Right.
the lead singer. All my girlfriends were screaming over the lead singer, and I was just like, I'm all about the lead guitar player over here. You know,
Yeah.
that's who I was in love with. And you know, last night I went to see Elton John. He's got
Oh
the
wow.
goodbye, the farewell Yellow Brick
Yes.
Road tour right now, and he was absolutely fantastic. Anybody who can catch that show before he's finished his tour
Right.
ought to. His voice is still just as good as it ever was. He was so grateful and gracious to the sold out stadium. His piano tuning was just beautiful and sounded amazing. His band was incredible. Like the percussion section that they had was huge. Two different drummers. And then, of course, you've got Davy Johnstone, who's been his longtime guitar player, and he's up there playing a Gibson SG double neck with a slide. He's playing slide on a double neck, which I'd never seen before, and it sounded fantastic. The way that I'd never heard
Flawless,
slide
right?
played like that.
Flawless, right? Yeah.
Totally, they have
Yeah.
it together, first class show. And then Davey pulls out this inverted, upside down flying V guitar. That's just the wildest looking guitar you've ever seen. So yeah, I was really, really inspired just watching Davy Johnstone last night, and you know, and then you're mesmerized by Elton and everything
So
else.
it's funny you bring up Elton. So I got to tell you the story. I wasn't planning on talking about this, but you bring this up. So next to me is, you can't see it because it's over here in the corner, is a Norman guitar. It's an
Okay.
acoustic guitar. I picked it up at this store called Waltz's Guitar in Toronto at Davisville and Young when I lived down there. And a great little shop. You could go in, it was very intimate. They'd let you just play with whatever you want and tell us what you need, sort of thing, right?
Just don't
And
play Stairway.
yeah, right. So I like at one point I was like, I like the neck on that guitar. I like the pickup. I like the body in that one. But I don't see anything that has all these. And they're like, we could custom make it. Like we can get it custom made for you. Really? Okay. So I ordered this custom made acoustic Norman guitar. And one of the first songs I learned to play on it was Candle in the Wind.
Oh,
And
that's
so I called the guitar is called Norma Jean. So,
oh, love it. That's
right.
fantastic.
And so you bring up Alden, and I'm like, I can't believe the connection there, right? And it's sitting right there. So, anyways,
Beautiful. Love
not
that.
about me, about you. I want to talk more. So, um, your book, the one we're talking about right now, Immortal Axes. Did it take you 8 years to finish?
Yeah, well, the first book took me 17 years
Right.
because I was working for Kodak and then I had two yoga studios. I'm also a Kundalini yoga teacher. And
Wow.
at that time, I was into Bikram and I had two Bikram yoga studios. So it took a long time. But then I sold my businesses and I'd left Kodak and I was able to focus full time. So after the first book came out, I was on a momentum. I had
Right.
photo requests still going even after the first book published. So I just kept going. But the second book took me 7 years, start to finish. By the time you start and get a book in your hand, it's seven
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
And the website is called immortalaxes.com. I'll put that in the podcast notes for folks. But there's a couple of names there. And we talked about Les Paul, writing in your first one, but Peter Frampton
Yeah.
writes the foreword on this book and Suzi Quatro the afterword. How'd that come to be? What's the connection with Peter and Susie on this one?
Well, first of all, I just got to mention living in Slave Lake, Alberta, I used to lay on my little twin bed with my record player and I would play Peter Frampton Comes Alive. And I
Mm.
would lay on my bed and just stare at that album cover, all in love with Peter Frampton and his beautiful curly locks, long hair, and that black Les Paul. Of course, I didn't know it was a Gibson. I didn't know it was a Les Paul. I didn't know anything about guitars, but I loved Peter Frampton. And I never in a million years did I ever dream that I would photograph that guitar. Now, that very guitar also was in a plane crash. And it was thought to have been perished forever with all the gear. The two pilots died and all the gear was lost. And you can read about this in the book, but 32 years later, Peter gets the guitar back. Now, I had photographed his signature Les Paul three pickup guitar for the first book in 2002. And when that book published in 2013, that was the year that he got the original guitar back. So when I was shooting for this second book, Immortal Axes, of course, I went back to them and said, "Hey guys, you got to let me photograph the original guitar now." So I finally got the chance to go to Nashville and photograph it. And while I was hovering over that guitar, I mean, it's all burned up, right? He kept it exactly how he refurbished it when he got the guitar back, but it still had the wounds of the plane crash, the burns on it, and there was pearl inlay, the diamond inlays and the
Mhm.
Gibson headstock. A couple of those inlays had popped out and were gone, and he didn't replace those. He left that as the wounds because he was wounded when that guitar got lost, and
Right.
he said afterwards, I'm never going to get attached to another guitar again, because that one was his baby. That guitar changed his whole life, his whole playing, everything. He was playing hollow body ES 335s, I think, and they were feedbacking on him, and so he got that guitar because a friend of his said, "Hey, I just put a third pickup in this Les Paul. Why don't you give it a try? Because it cancels out the feedback, right?" So he started playing that guitar, and he just was like, "Oh my God, can I buy this guitar from you? This is amazing." And the guy goes, "No, no, keep it. It's my gift." So that
Wow.
was his
Yeah.
guitar.
Yeah.
So anyway, after I got home from shooting the guitar, which he aptly named Phoenix because it literally
Right.
rose from the ashes. I'm looking at the images and my heart is just like, wow, like this is the ultimate immortal axe. And the reason I title the book that is because guitars hold the stories of the player, of the one who wrote the song on there. And even when that person lives or when they're passing away, have passed on, that guitar still holds that initial story and that emotion, and it makes it immortal. It immortalizes the music forever. So I said to him, I wrote and I just said, Peter, I'm looking at these images, I'm just so inspired to ask you if you could write the foreword for the book, because your guitar story is the epitome of the title of my book. And he agreed. I mean, he got it. He
It makes
understood.
sense. Yeah.
And
And Susie, and but so I want to ask you something about
oh,
the forward, but Suzi Quatro, how about that?
yeah. So, and it's so incredible how this is intertwined. So I'm actually, I get approval to photograph Steve Marriott's guitar from Humble Pie. Okay, his guitar player, Peter and
Yeah.
him played together, and in the same trip, also Suzi Quattro's bass.
Now, what's
So
is this like just that you pick up the phone? Is this another hey phone
oh, it
call
takes
or
time, like Suzi
yeah?
Quatro I met in LA at the She Rocks Awards, which I'm a sponsor of every year. It's this phenomenal event that recognizes women in music. So Suzi
Right
got
on.
nominated and got the award for the Icon of the Year. And so I met her, and I actually had met her sister, Patty Quattro,
Yeah.
prior to that. And so I think she was key in making that connection happen. So Patty's guitar is also in the book.
Yep.
The Pleasure Seekers. She was one of the first all-girl bands too. So and Susie, I mean, they all kicked ass coming out of Detroit, right? They
Yeah.
hung
Yeah.
out with all the boys, the Kiss, and you know, uh, MC5, Wayne Kramer, and hardcore, man, Alice Cooper.
Yeah.
So these girls don't put up with any BS. And so anyway, I'm over there, and I was scheduled to shoot Susie's bass first. So I'm at her house shooting the bass, and I'm leaving now. And like that bass is killer. Her father gave it to her when she was like 14 or something like that. It was the only instrument left in the house that none of the other siblings were playing. So she got stuck playing the bass. It's as big as her. She's so tiny. Anyway, and she didn't know it at the time. She didn't know it. She just put it in her hands and just started playing it. Anyway, so I'm leaving. I'm like, okay, Susie, thanks so much. Oh, but by the way, I just wanted to let you know Peter Frampton's writing the foreword for the book. And she's like, oh, that's so cool. When I first came to England, to record my first solo album. She had left her family. She was in a family band. They were all mad at her for leaving the family, and she was just like heart wrenching. But she knew in her gut that that's what she had to do, and she was given the opportunity. The gateway was there for her, and she took it and moved to England and was recording her first album, but didn't have a band. So they were hiring session musicians to play parts. They hired Peter Frampton to play on one of the songs, and she was saying to her manager, I really like him. Like, it'd be cool if he could become a part of my band. And he said, Susie, he's an amazing guitar player, but there can only be one star in the band,
Mm.
and it's got to be you. And that was before Peter made it. He was a session musician, and her
Wow.
manager recognized the enormity of Peter's talent at that time, and knew that he'd potentially outshine Susie. So I'm like, wow, that's so interesting, because I'm actually going right now to photograph Steve Marriott's guitar. I'm like, he's like an hour up the road. So we say our goodbyes, and she's like, cool, cool, right? So I get in the car and I'm driving to Steve Marriott, the guy that has Steve Marriott's guitar. And I'm driving and I'm just going, she's got to write the afterword for the book. I mean, Peter wrote the foreword,
Yeah.
and that story she just told me is the perfect tie-in for the afterword. So anyway, I get over there to Steve, where the Steve Marriott guitar is, and it turns out that was the last guitar that Steve played, and he played it with Peter Frampton, because he and Peter had aligned again so many years after Humble Pie and said, let's do an album together. And they actually wrote and recorded 3 songs, which he recorded with that guitar that's featured in this Immortal Axes book. And it was the last guitar he played, and he played it with Peter. So I get home from that trip and I'm just like, wow, like my mind gets blown too. I'm like, it's
Yeah.
emotional for me. I'm just like, wow, like the universe has got me on this winding road that's just incredible and so enriching for my own life.
Yeah.
And it's such an honor for me to like have access and to be able to share it with the world. It's like my gift to the world. They're like jewels, all these images. And so I get home and I write to Susie. I go, so great to have spent time with you. And I just driving to Steve Marriott's, realizing you just got to write the afterword for the book. I mean, and plus I want a woman's voice in the book too. And she wrote back instantly and she goes, I feel it. I am the one that is supposed to write the afterword for your book. And she's a psychic. She's very, she'll sit until she'll look at you for 5 minutes and then she'll just like give you a download. So she wrote that afterward overnight. Like I had it within 2 days.
What an incredible tie-in. That like that when I was like looking at that and I'm like, what is it? There's got to be a connect. I don't know what it was. I was like, there's got to be a connection here. Phenomenal,
You
phenomenal
nailed it.
connection. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's something else too. So as I went through that, as I went through your book, I went back and I reread the Peter Frampton's foreword, and the last few sentences, and you kind of touched on it, but as listeners are listening, they're getting an inside experience here with you. He says this. Here's the cool thing. Maybe Immortal Axes will help you look at your own guitars in a new light. Where did that nick come from? What riffs did they play? Who did you play it for and how did they react? Memories, personal stories, artistic expressions. Yes, guitars need to be treasured. These famous ones and your own.
Mm.
So I'm that's stuck in my mind, and I'm looking through the pictures you took. And like I'm always like looking at my guitars going, oh, it's got that scratch, it's got that nick, there's this. And I ended up looking at my own guitars differently, because then I was like, oh, that happened here. Oh, this is when I went up to Sault Ste. Marie. This is when I went to Kitchener. Oh, right. Now I'm like, I think I just want to leave it alone.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to touch it, because now I'm like, I'm relating myself back to my own, right. And it was through your pictures and through like the words of Peter Frampton there that I kind of made that connection. But so I went through that, and I think you did too. But did your relationship or the way you view guitars change once you started photographing them, or was it already that way before? And then the photographing was like the bonus, right? Like, because you're capturing stories inside of stories here,
Mhm.
Lisa.
Yeah, very true. Well, first of all, I love that you got that insight from reading Peter Frampton's foreword and looking at my pictures. That's very gratifying to me. Um, because really, the work that that I love to do, you're supposed to be in service with what we do. Like you're being in service by interviewing people, interesting people that your subscribers want to hear cool stories,
Yeah,
So you're being in service, and I'm being in service by being persevering, having this persevering attitude to just not give up and keep asking and getting access to the instruments that I love so much. I have to say that when I first opened that first case of that first vintage guitar that I photographed in Memphis, Tennessee, and smelling that patina, I had the spirit of those guitars enter into me and make me feel something I had never felt before. And I am kind of addicted to that feeling. So I can't wait for the next guitar case to open up. And that first guitar spoke to me, and I just knew instantly, like, I have to do this. And when I got to New York, it's like, I got to photograph famous ones. I got my practice down now on these beautiful vintage instruments, but now I got to photograph something that somebody really wants to see because it's owned by Les Paul or by Ben Harper or Ace Frehley or Rick Nielsen or Aldo Nova or anybody. I mean, that you love their music. Jimmy Page. I mean, you get to see the double neck Stairway to Heaven guitar with all the nicks and scratches on it, and he's not taken his off. I mean, that's exactly takes him to that place where the guitar fell over and the neck broke off because someone accidentally pushed him, and that someone that accidentally pushed him was Neil Young. Like you have all those stories wrapped into one. So yeah, these guitars are layered with stories, and you see that with the stickers that artists put on them, and
right.
you see in this book, Dimebag Darrell, his Dean from Hell guitar that's got the lightning bolts all over the front, but you never get to see the backs of guitars. And in my book, you do. You flip that Dean from Hell over, and you see how he has his truss rod springs set, and you see all the buckle rash on the back of that guitar, and you get to see the belt buckle that
Right.
made those scratches, which was his Kiss belt buckle that he wore for years because he's a huge Kiss fan, and the guitar's photographed on his Kiss pinball machine. So
You made me think of something too, Lisa. You're I'm supposed to be pulling stuff out of you, and you're pulling stuff out of me. The memory of opening the case, right, and the guitar and the smell. Um, I hope if my friend is listening, I hope he doesn't get offended. I tell this story, but I was visiting a friend one time, and he says, "I don't really play my guitar anymore. I was thinking about you. Do you want it?" And I
Hmm.
said, "Yeah, okay, sure, right." It's a Takamine guitar, acoustic, and so he pulls this thing out, and it's in the case, and the case is just pretty banged up, like really banged up. And I open the guitar, and what comes out of it is like smoke, heavy smoke, like it had been in a smokehouse or
Okay.
something, right? So, but I'm looking at this guitar, and I'm thinking to myself, the guitar is like talking to me, going, "Please take me, please take me, and let's go," right? It hangs like out in my living room here in our basement area. I have, guitar hooks, and it's one of the guitars that hangs on the wall. I brought it. I had it, cleaned up you know, it doesn't smell like smoke anymore, but yeah, I did a little bit of restoration on it, and it kind of hangs there. But it's just that the guitar talked to me. I felt like it talked to me anyways. Like,
Mhm.
let's go, all right, let's get out of here. Again, you're pulling some of these stories out of me. I want to you're telling us stories about the folks that you met, and there's a couple, there's two or three maybe that I wanted to ask in particular, and hopefully that's okay.
Sure.
I feel like we're living the book. So anybody who's listening, I don't know how you don't want to have this book in your hands after, because I feel like you're bringing it to life. You're really the things you're talking about, you're bringing it to life. Um, I want to start with BB King, and one set of guitars that you photographed is called Lucille. But you say many Lucille's in the book, and that as I'm reading through it, I'm going, this is intriguing. Many Lucille's, right? The first I think was a Gibson ES 225, but there's a story behind why he named his guitar Lucille and
Hmm.
how those photos came to be. Without giving away too much, can you walk us through
Sure.
any of it?
Well, I think it's kind of a fairly well-known story now,
Mm.
but he was playing in a juke joint back in the day when he was a young man, and juke joints are made out of they're tin shacks basically, and they heated them with barrels of kerosene, and they'd light it up, and that's how you stayed warm. Well, a fight broke out in this bar, and the started place went up in fire. So everyone's running out of the building, BB included, and he realizes once he got out of the building, oh man, I left my guitar in there. So he goes back in to grabs his guitar, and he runs back out and realizes what he just did, was like dumb. And so he goes, what happened here? And they found out that this fight broke out over a woman named Lucille. So he named the guitar Lucille to remind himself never to do something so dumb again. And so I think it's kind of interesting that people started naming their guitars, a lot of them after women, including yourself.
You know what? Yeah, I did, right? I'm, unsuspectingly, but yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, I just love that story, and I thought coming from you, I wanted folks to hear that coming from you,
So it
to
was such
kind
a
of
cool
put the
story.
pieces
And,
on it.
and so I got access because my girlfriend, who sadly recently passed away, I miss her so much here in Vegas.
Mhm.
She lived a couple doors down from BB, and she'd go take him, knock on his door, and bring him a cherry pie every now and then. And his daughter, Patty, would answer the door. So she got to know Patty a little bit, and then she introduced me to Patty, and that's how I ended up photographing his guitars.
Mm.
And yeah, she's a dear friend of mine now.
And that's so obviously this is after he had passed or whatever, and you're filming. So what's that like? Like you're filming somebody's guitars and they're not around anymore. Is that?
You're sad. Like I photographed John Lennon's guitar too.
Mm.
His J160E that was famous for the bed-in that he and Yoko used in Montreal and in Amsterdam. It's bittersweet, isn't it? You're photographing these guitars that you see them playing in videos when they're so full of life.
Right.
And so I'm grateful. I mean, I photographed George Harrison's Gibson SG that he used on the Revolver album, and John Lennon used it on the White album. Um, there's Steve Marriott's guitar is in there. There's a lot of people that have passed away in this book, included in this book. Bo Diddley, there's a bunch of his guitars.
I'm gonna ask you about Bo. I want to talk about that. So you're the theme here, passed away. So it's funny you say that because Tom Petty kind of caught my eye too.
Yeah.
And the thing with that one is like, as fans, we always we may have a perception about a musician or what they do and things like that, but it isn't always reality. You photographed his first Gibson Flying V, but there's a story about the ownership behind that guitar.
Yeah.
It-
It actually was never owned by Tom.
Mm,
So it wasn't really his first Flying V. What it was they didn't have any money, They were a young group. They were Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. They were just kind of like getting their footing, and they had to do one of their, they had to do their black and white promo photo that they sent out to all the record labels and radio stations and stuff like that. So you can actually see this image online. It's like the Tom with the rest of the band on a white background, and he's holding a Flying V, which belonged to his buddy Mark Stimson, that happened to have one. And Tom thought the guitar was so cool, but he didn't have one of his own. So he was like, "Hey, Mark, can I borrow the V, for our photo shoot?" And so Mark loaned it to him. And they loved the picture so much that it actually inspired the Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers logo, where you see the heart and the Flying V going through it. And that guitar eventually was auctioned off, and it belongs to a gentleman named Mark Diamond, who, this is how these photo shoots sometimes happen for me. We were looking for new homeowners insurance. So we're talking to this insurance agent, and I'm emailing back and forth, and my salutations at the bottom, Lisa S. Johnson, 108 Rockstar Guitars, and the link to my website. So this insurance agent clicks on my link and sees my website about guitars, and then he emails me. He goes, "As an aside, I happen to have this buddy who's a major guitar collector, and he owns, like, David Gilmour's guitar and Tom Petty's Flying V. Would you be interested?" I'm like, "Absolutely." So the next thing I know, I'm flying over to New Jersey to meet Mark Diamond, and I'm photographing Tom Petty's Flying V and David Gilmour's Gretsch.
So did you know it wasn't his guitar before you did the
Yeah, yeah,
oh,
I
you did
knew.
know that.
I
Okay.
knew because and the reason why it still qualifies to be in this book is because it is significant, because it was what stimulated them to
Yeah.
make that logo like that. And
Yeah.
you can still see that photo. It's a most famous photo of the band.
It's funny because as you're telling these stories, I'm thinking, a lot of what you're telling me is listening and communicating with people, understanding what somebody's looking for or wants or what they're truly doing and things like that. And you just think, we don't always take a lot of time to do that these days, right? But it's
It's
really connecting. And so I last year I interviewed Anthony Rosano. He opened for Bob Seger here in Toronto. Anthony Rosano and the Conquerors. And I really liked his band. Anyways, I ended up calling him and saying, "Hey, would you be willing to do a show with me?" And so yeah, so we do a show and we're talking and he's telling me about, how he's touring with Seeger and all that. And one of the questions I asked him was, "Do you still own your first guitar?" And he says, "I don't. I wish I did, but I don't. It's a blue Area Pro 2 SL Stratocaster."
wow.
So he's on the look, Lisa. He's on the look for that guitar. So I'm
Okay, I'll
I'm
keep my eye
throwing
out.
it out here.
Hey.
I told him I would, I'm gonna keep an eye on it for it. And since we're talking about that, like that just came up with, with that sort of thing, people looking for that guitars and things like that. If you ever hear about it, we're looking for that guitar.
Okay, well, I did just help Randy Bachman find his 1957 Gretsch 5120 that got
No
stolen
way.
out of his hotel room in Toronto 47 years ago. And it was by total chance. He came to LA to promote a record, and I asked if I could interview him. So we did a YouTube. I uploaded the interview on YouTube, and I'm asking him about this guitar in the video, which got posted on YouTube, and I'm asking him about this Gretsch that was stolen. And so he tells me all about it, and it is in this particular video. And that's it. I'm like, "Okay, I hope I can help you find it, and I'll photograph it," right? So this was like probably 3 years ago. Somebody saw this guy, William Long, saw that interview on YouTube, COVID hit. He had nothing to do, sitting at home. He decided to look up that video Randy was talking about, finds, studies the guitar. He ends up finding the guitar for sale in a Japanese guitar store. But then he matches the pictures up, he can see it's got this special knot in the top corner, and the below in small print it says sold. So he's like, oh man, I found the guitar, but now it's sold. So he goes, but I think it's got to be in Japan if it was sold in a guitar shop in Japan.
Yeah.
So he continues to keep searching and searching, and he finds this Japanese guitar player in a bar doing a gig playing that guitar. He
No
matches
way,
the
man.
videos
Yeah.
up. It's Randy's guitar. So Randy just gets the guitar back. Then this other film company also sees my YouTube video, and they go, "We want to do a documentary about this guitar." So they're filming this documentary about the guitar. Meanwhile, Randy emails me and he goes, "Lisa, you got to come to Vancouver Labor Day weekend. I'm going to be playing that guitar for the first time. You can photograph it." I'm like, "Okay." So then another friend of mine happens to know the guy who's doing the documentary, and he's telling him, "Oh, my friend Lisa, she's going to be going up to Vancouver to photograph Randy's guitar." He's like, "You're kidding. We're going to be there doing the documentary. We want her to be in the documentary." So I go up there and I photograph Randy's guitar, and they've got the cameras. So I'm going to be in this rockumentary called Lost and Found, all about Randy Bachman's,
When's that coming out?
next year
Oh,
sometime.
you're gonna have to let us know. So we just finished talking about the upcoming project with Randy Bachman, so we're looking forward to that. Um, Lisa, I wanted to ask about Bo Diddley.
Mm.
He had a holy trinity of guitars. Can you tell us about that and how you met Charlie Tona, who allowed you to photograph those instruments?
Yeah. So there's a guy named Ricotta. That's his cousin, and he makes ricotta guitars for different artists. They're hand carved guitars. They're stunning instruments, and he made one for J.Y. Young from Styx. And so when I photographed that guitar, the guitar tech didn't have a whole lot of information about it. So I started researching the luthier. And so Vinny Ricotta comes up and he's got this website, and I emailed him and I said, "I just thought you'd like to know that I photographed this guitar of JY's and it's going to be featured in my book." And he was really excited and appreciative, and he called me up right away and just said, "I'm super stoked. This is really cool." And because a lot of these private luthiers don't really get much press or, exposure. And so he was really psyched about it. And we became friends over the phone. And then he said, "You know what? You need to meet my cousin, Charlie Tona, because he lives down in Florida, and he was best buddies with Bo Diddley for many years. And when Bo passed away, prior to his passing, he gave Charlie all of his most precious guitars because he knew that Charlie would keep them in safekeeping and would do something significant with them. He was worried that his kids would just pawn them off,
Mm.
or sell them, and he wanted something special to happen with them. And so Charlie lived up to that. Charlie has had them featured in the very last issue of Guitar Aficionado magazine. He had them featured in this Trinity we're talking about, the Father, Son, and
Yeah,
the Holy Ghost.
yeah.
They were featured at the Musical Instrument Museum in Scottsdale, Arizona. I worked with the Museum of Design Atlanta for a very special guitar exhibit in 2020, and I worked with them to procure some of the guitars for that exhibit, and then plus they had a ton of my images, giant murals on the wall as part of that exhibit as well. And so they were pleased to have Charlie provide some of the Bo Diddley's guitars for that exhibit as well. So he's had it in three museums. I featured them as well in my booth at the NAMM show. And so Charlie's just a wonderful guy, and he was very close to Bo, and they actually met when Bo was playing some gig in Florida, and it was part of a car show, and Charlie had collected cars, like cool kinds of souped up cars. And Charlie had his car there on display, and Bo Diddley arrives there with his daughter, and he sees this car of Charlie's, and he walks up to Charlie and he goes, "Do you own this? Do you own this car?" Charlie goes, "Yeah, I sure do." And he goes, "Well, I'm Bo. I'm going to be playing here later, and I sure like your car. He goes, I'd like to buy it. And Charlie says, well, it's not for sale. And he's like, what? Come on, you can sell this car. Charlie tells the story so much better. He's just amazing. He's got Bo's accent and everything just down. And Charlie just says, well, listen, it's not for sale. And uh, they had some words, and then Bo said something like, well, you know what? If you take my daughter for a ride in that car, I'll be okay with that. And so Charlie ended up taking his daughter for a ride in the car, and they were just best friends ever since because Charlie didn't stand down to him. He wasn't like all fanboy. He just
Yeah.
kind of gave it right back to Bo. And they were fast friends ever since. And Charlie actually ended up playing with him a lot and playing harmonica with him and guitar. And they ended up building some guitars together. So Bo loved to hand make guitars. And in my book, Immortal Axes, you'll see the very first handmade guitar that Bo ever made, and that was provided to me through Guitar Hard Rock International.
Mm.
And I went to New York City and photographed it there, along with Tony Iommi's Monkey Gibson SG and Malcolm Young's Back in Black Gretsch that he used on that tour. But Bo's was like an extra bonus because I'd already photographed these guitars of Bo's that are all featured in Immortal Axes, including his another handmade guitar called the Get Drum, and it's this very odd shaped guitar made out of wood. It's heavy, and he built into the wood a MIDI player. You see, back in those days, no, Bo was probably the very first one to innovate that. Like, Bo was super smart. He knew what he wanted. He wanted to be able to sit and play guitar and be the whole band. Because you're in Gainesville. You're like, there's no other, you need to be able to make all the money. So
Yeah.
he wanted to be able to have all the sounds incorporated in that guitar. So he called it the Get Drum. And he actually meant to say guitar drum, but he misspelled it. And so he wrote right on the guitar GET for guitar instead of GIT. He wrote GET dash drum. So it was his guitar drum guitar, and it's very odd shape. So that guitar is called The Father. It was the first one that he did like that. So then he came up. He wanted to have another guitar, and so Charlie is also a luthier, just like his cousin Vinny Ricotta is. So Charlie makes beautiful guitars. And so Bo said, I want a guitar that's like my box shape, but I want a different kind of wood, and these are the kind of sounds I want. And so Charlie got this zebra wood, and he made a box guitar out of the zebra wood to Bo's specifications. And then they made the last guitar together that Bo wanted. And this one also has a MIDI player that attaches to the bottom of it, so it doesn't have that odd shape. It's actually a box, his signature box guitar. And then they have these like hooks where it kind of slides on and hangs down from the guitar. You'll see it in my book.
Yeah.
It's actually not pieced together. It's not attached, but you can see the guitar and you can see the MIDI player with his hat and his badge that Charlie had made for him, because he used to say, you know what, Charlie, everyone has their name. They've got BB King. He's the king of the blues, and you got what's his name, Chuck, the other blues guy. My mind's drawing a blank right now, but he's the king of soul. And you got Elvis. He's the king of rock and roll. And he goes, I don't have a title. So Charlie kind of left it for a while, and he thought about it and thought about it. And then he thought, you know what? Bo is the DNA of rock and roll, because he is so innovative and he thinks up these little gadgets and whimsical things to do to his guitars. So he actually had a police badge made up that says on it the DNA of rock and roll, and it looks just like a police badge. And Bo would put it on the top of his cowboy hat. And there were only two ever made. One has number one on it, and that's Bo's, and the other one has number two on it, and that's Charlie's. So they were best buddies. So the third guitar that he made with the MIDI player was the Holy Grail, and they also named it the Bad Dude because it's badass. I mean, it looks badass and it plays badass. And we actually had that guitar hanging in my booth at NAM a few years back, and tons of people got to sit and play it like it was in the
Oh,
NAM
really?
booth. So it was very special. Yeah. So that's the kind of guy Charlie Tony is. You know, he
What a
delivers.
wild, Lisa, what a wild story, and just the catalog you have of like of the events inside your head. It's phenomenal. And you bring the pages to life. Like, you reference your book Immortal Axes, and when you look at the pictures, you just bring everything that you spoke to. Your pictures bring this all to life. It's just phenomenally captured.
Thank you.
um I continue to be myself a bit of a fan in terms of some of the stories that you have in there. The other one that caught my eye, the Aldo Nova pages.
Yeah.
You say in your book, and I found this interesting, I pulled up to fellow Canadian Aldo Nova's home. And I like the fact, by the way, that you said fellow Canadian because you associated with Canada there.
That's right.
um Home in Montreal, and knocked. Aldo greeted me at the door with his smiling blue eyes, and it was an immediate heart connection. We went into his recording studio where he sat down and played a song for me on his Marconi arpeggi, an exotic instrument that is a cross between a piano and a dulcimer. So first, I'm like, you just knocked on Aldo Nova's door. Was it that easy? Hey, Aldo, Lisa here. Like, how did, like, are we gonna have people knocking on Aldo Nova's door here or what?
You know, if you've never been to the NAM show, it's a really grueling show. It's 4 days long. It's freaking loud. Everyone's demoing guitars and basses and cymbals and drums and instruments all at once. And you're shouting. I do interviews and we're all like huddling close to each other so that we can hear each other shouting. Um, but and you think to yourself, I don't know if I can do this again another year. But what happens is you end up meeting, even if you just meet like one cool person at NAM, but it's always more. You meet like lots of cool people at NAM, but you meet this one cool person who says, I can get you Aldo Nova's guitar. And I'm like, really? I'm Canadian. Yeah, I'd love that. So I met this guy named Benny Mallet. He loved what I was doing at NAM and he just was intrigued with the whole thing. And he sometimes guitar techs, or he's a limo driver. He'll drive different artists around. And he had Aldo's number and he's like, here, call Aldo. Just tell him I told you to call. So I pick up the phone and I call Aldo. I don't think he knew Benny's name from Adam. I really don't think that he recognized the name. But Aldo, first of all, he's Canadian. So he's just a nice guy. And he called me back. And I said, I'm Lisa Johnson and I photograph guitars and I photograph different people. And I would really love to photograph your collection or a few in your collection because he has some very special guitars, Aldo, and Benny had told me all about them. And so he said, "Yeah, we could set that up. Just let's. When do you want to come? So we ended up planning it, and I went up to Montreal. I flew up just to go meet Aldo and photograph his guitars. And in the same time, when I actually got there and it was actually happening, uh, Benny said, "Hey, you're in town. Why don't you shoot Voivod's guitars?" Piggy, Dennis, and I said, yeah, that'd be great. So I ended up photographing those guitars too.
Wow.
But I went to Aldo's first, and he was just such a sweetheart. Montreal was under construction. Didn't matter what freeway you were on, it was under construction. And we had agreed. I think I was going to show up there at 10 in the morning or 11 o'clock or something. So I'm in the morning traffic. I'm trying to get there, and my nav everywhere it's telling me to go is a freaking roadblock. And so now I'm getting late and I hate that. So I'm speeding down a service road that I've already gone around 3 times, and I'm speeding, trying to get off this off ramp and get to where I'm trying to go. And I get the cops
Ah,
pulling me over. And I'm like, geez. So I unroll the window and he goes, ma'am, you're speeding. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. I said, but I'm not from here. I'm from Las Vegas and I'm trying to get to Aldo Nova's house. I've got a photo shoot with him. You can see I got my gear in here and I'm late now. And he goes, you're going to Aldo Nova's? I go, yes, I've got a photo shoot. And he goes, follow me. I'll get you there. I'll
no
get you off
way.
this road. I'm like, Thank you so much. Nice Canadian police officer. I think that's the
Wow.
only time I've ever gotten off. And he said, "I'll tell you, I'll wave at you when you're supposed to turn off the certain exit." He said,
Wow.
"Thank you so much," and he got me out of that horrible traffic and to the exit. And I got to Aldo's probably within 10 minutes of being late.
Shout out to the policeman who helped Lisa get to Aldo Nova's house.
Montreal, and I didn't
Yeah,
even speak
Montreal.
French.
Did he have a French accent or
I don't even remember. It
you
was
don't
so long
remember?
ago. I
Yeah.
don't think he did, to be honest. I don't
Yeah.
think he did. But Aldo, there he was. And he's not that. He's a small man. I'm 5'2", so he was just a little bit taller than me. And he just opened up the door, and these big, beautiful blue eyes I just won't forget, and his blonde
Yeah.
hair. And we just hit it off right away. And he started playing that cool instrument I'd never seen or heard before, and playing his, guitars. And then he's like, "Well, what do you want to use for a background?" I'm like, "Well, I have backgrounds I brought with me." And he goes, "Well, I've got something." Because he wanted to show me what he had. So he asked me what I had. And he brings out this bolt of fabric. He'd gotten a whole bolt of leopard skin looking fabric, which is one of his motifs. He
Yeah.
always does the leopard skin thing. And I'm like, "That's fantastic." So we laid out that whole bolt of fabric. It was massive amounts of fabric, and we laid his beautiful
Awesome.
Liberatory guitars on it one by one and photographed them.
So you also wrote, and sticking with Aldo Nova here, you wrote that Aldo's signature Les Paul is his favorite guitar
Hmm.
and one of only 12 that was made.
Yeah,
Now this is interesting. He has the first one, and
yeah,
Rick Nielsen of Cheap Trick owns the other 11. So
that's
according to
right.
Aldo, Rick keeps them in impeccable condition and he rarely takes them out of the case. Why does he only have one and why does Rick have the other 11?
Because Aldo designed this guitar. It's got a Les Paul body, and it has an Explorer headstock, which was probably the first of its kind. That's not a regular guitar that Gibson makes. So it's very unique. And Rick found out about them probably through the Gibson factory, I'm guessing, and they only made 11. So Aldo got the first one. I mean, it was his design, it's his guitar, and I believe the serial number on it is 0001. And Rick wanted it. He wanted all of them. He wanted the whole collection. So, but Aldo's like, "No, man, I'm not selling my number one. That's mine." So Rick got the other 10, and Aldo has the one. Yeah.
That's wild.
Hmm.
All right. Um, so look, I'm
Actually, those
bombarding
numbers
you.
were wrong. There's 12. So Rick has
There's
11,
12.
and
Rick has 11.
Aldo has one. Yeah.
I'm gonna shoot Rick an email and see if he'll sell me one.
Good luck.
No. So look, Lisa, there's so many tidbits in this book. I could keep on going on with you with all the questions, about all the different artists and the guitars you cover. But I want to know a couple of other things. I want to
Okay.
know if there was a guitar that you wanted to photograph or an artist, and maybe it just hasn't happened for one reason or another. And I know we talked about the Phoenix. We talked about that. But maybe something that you're still hoping to get, and why that guitar or why that artist, if it exists.
Yeah. Well, there's two that are breaking my heart right now. Angus Young's Back in Black Gibson SG, I want in the worst way. I mean, AC/DC was the Back in Black tour was my third concert. I think I was 14, and I never looked back. I was that, and still, whenever I turn on AC/DC, it's an electrifying thrill. I love their riffs. I love the beat of the music. I love the lyrics. It's dirty and nasty, and it's grungy, and it just is the epitome of rock and roll for me. I mean, when I was 14, it just made such a massive impression on me. I mean, we used to go home at, I don't know if I can talk about this on the radio, but we'd go home. I got a D in math because I'd go home at lunchtime. My girlfriend Barbara from Sweden and we'd turn on back and, back, hearing that bell ringing at the beginning, and then, we'd be like smoking a spliff on the side, and then we'd go back to math class. So no wonder I got a D, but we just loved AC/DC. And um I've probably requested Angus's guitar more than anybody, at least 10 times, and they just don't respond.
Hmm.
Um, and so then I finally met somebody who is in Australia who has a guitar store, and he got to know Angus's cousin, who eventually got a copy of my book. I sent two, one for the cousin, one for Angus, and he delivered it, hand delivered it to Angus, and Angus said no because he said it might conflict with another project. So that's my heart is the
Yeah.
hit in my stomach about that. But who knows? I mean, maybe someday I'll go to Australia and I'll get a hold of the cousin, and the cousin will say, "Hey, Angus, Lisa's in town. Remember that chick with the book?
Come on over.
Somehow times that's how it happens. They go, oh yeah, that conflict that didn't happen. Yeah, tell her to come over. So I still am hopeful there. The other one is Mark Knopfler. I mean, I Sultans of Swing is one of the all-time greatest guitar solos of all time for me, and Communique and Tunnel of Love and Making Movies and all those songs. I mean, they make me cry. I mean, they bring me back to summers in Penticton, BC, and hanging out with my friends, and also like my parents' divorce and feeling heartache, and your first loves too. I had my first boyfriends, serious boyfriends, and I just I just love Mark Knopfler's material, and I want that red Strat that he used on Sultans of Swing. And I don't even know if he still has it. Probably he does. Is my guess. And I even know my girlfriend is friends with Mark Knopfler's buddy's wife. Okay, so we get a book to her, and she actually knows the husband too. And he takes the book. He goes for tea with Mark, and he goes to car. They're into cars together and whatever. And so he hand delivers the book to Mark, and I have this handwritten note in there, beautiful, that references songs, and it's like a killer little note, not long. And nope, no
No
response.
response.
And I followed up. I had my publicist actually follow up for shooting for this book, and they said no, not for Mark.
Angus and Mark, if you're out there, you want
Yeah,
to be part of this. You want to be
yeah,
part of Lisa's work.
yeah.
Yeah,
That
we
would make
want them.
my whole. I would be complete if I could have those two. But there's still more. There's still many
There
more.
is. Yeah.
There's Stevie Ray Vaughan. There's Roy Buchanan. There's Adam Jones from Tool. I would love to have. There's tons of country guys. Waylon
Right.
Jennings and I have Johnny Cash. I've got Willie Nelson's in this book.
Yeah.
Willie
Waylon
Nelson
Jennings
was
would be really cool too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whaling would be amazing. I
Yeah.
don't have Bob Marley. There's still a lot to have. So Prince, those cloud guitars would be really cool, or his Mad Cat Telly, I would love to have. I'm not done yet. My work is not over.
That's good. I'm gonna ask you something about that we only have a few more questions to go here. I'm gonna hold off and ask you something about that in a bit. Do you have a favorite photo shoot of a guitar where it was your favorite, not just because of the guitar photos, but you've shared with us some experiences and conversations, etc. Maybe a combination of the artist, the guitar, the story. Do you have,
Hmm.
like, with all the work that you've done, is there one that you go, man, I really like that, was one of my favorites?
One of my favorites in this book is Dave Grohl. Dave Grohl, he, of course, was the drummer for Nirvana. But while he was with Nirvana, he was still writing Foo Fighters stuff. I mean, he had a lot of material when Kurt died. He already had a ton of Foo's material, and he's a phenomenal guitar player on top of being a phenomenal drummer. So I was able to capture his collection of Trini Lopez Gibson
Hmm.
guitars, which are very unique guitars themselves as well, with the diamond, F holes. They're not F holes, they're diamonds,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they're beautiful guitars. And there's another photographer in Los Angeles whose name is Lisa Johnson. She's a
Right.
blonde. as
Yeah.
well, and she photographs rock bands. She photographed Nirvana on the bed, that historical shot where they're on the bed, and so she knew Nirvana. She knew Dave from that shoot before. So when I put in the request to photograph Dave's guitars, he's like, they wrote back and they go, "Why are you being so formal? Yeah, of course you can come over and photograph the guitar." I'm like, this is not that Lisa Johnson. It's this Lisa Johnson. I'm Lisa S. Johnson. That's
Right.
why I put my Suzanne in there. And so they said yes anyway. So I went over and I took Lisa Johnson with me. So the two of us went, and they were saying, "Oh wow, it's so cool to have two Lisa Johnsons in the house." So we did the shoot together. She was there with my buddy Lon Friend, who is a veteran rock journalist. He was the editor of Rip magazine back in the '80s, and he put every band on the cover, including Nirvana. And he hired Lisa Johnson to shoot that image of Nirvana on the bed. So he's the one who actually introduced me to Lisa Johnson, and we've since developed a friendship. And
That's cool.
the three of us were there doing that shoot, and I shot all the guitars in a circle and on these beautiful rugs. And then I shot his number one, which is the Pelham blue Trini Lopez on this rug. And I didn't realize it at the time because you're in the heat of the moment. You can't be there all day. You got to get in and get out and get the job done. And they were very friendly and everything, but still, you can't
Yeah.
overstay. So I'm not like really looking at these pieces of tape that are on the rug. I don't even think I noticed the pieces of tape when I was taking the photograph of it. I get home and I'm editing the pictures, and you can see this in the book, The Immortal Axes. There's the guitar laying on the rug exactly where the drum kit is normally placed, and they have the black tape on the floor on the rug to mark where they put everything, and you can see like snare drum and all the drum parts on this tape. And I thought that was just so cool, and how that magically happened because he was the drummer for
Yeah.
Nirvana, but I'm photographing his guitar for the Foo Fighters.
Yeah, like there's just an organic element to that,
Yeah,
like
but not planned at all.
that's cool. Another great story. So when we started talking, I said, "Hey, you're touring the book. Are you touring anymore? Like, are you doing more tours with this book?"
Well, I just came back from being in Canada.
Right.
So right now we're going into the holidays. So that's why I did it in September, October in Canada, made a few stops. Um, and now we're still doing interviews as part of that, like
Okay.
with you, as part of that for the holiday season, just to bring it to the forefront of people's memories if they've
Yeah.
forgotten or didn't hear about it, because we didn't really do any press in Canada when the book came out, which is the book's actually been out for a year. It came out in September, but the year's gone by so fast. It seems like it just came out to me. It's still so fresh and new and beautiful. I mean, we printed 10,000 copies. The publisher went all in, all out. We printed 10,000 copies, and the last report I had, we'd already sold almost 6,000 of those.
Right
So
on.
I wanted to work with Eric to do
Yeah.
this Canadian press so that we can get another 4,000 copies sold this holiday season
Yeah, and
and
we're gonna have
move on
the
to
we're
the
gonna have
next
the
one.
links on the book in the notes, and we're gonna share that with everybody. Now, are you gonna do more books? Like, a couple of questions ago, you kind of said, "Hey, I'm not done." And I was gonna say, are there any guitars left for you to photograph? You're
Yeah.
you're on a guitar tear, or I mean, you could always photograph mine. Like I'm
Hey.
open, and I'm an easy phone call. Joking aside, are you moving on to any other instruments, maybe too, or?
I've thought about it, and it's in the back of my mind. I have a concept for a book that would incorporate the guitar along with some other instruments as
Mm,
well. I've always been intrigued about how often see the guitar player and bass player and even the rhythm player. They always turn toward the drummer, and they're playing with the drummer because either they need the drummer to get them back in step, or they're jamming with the drummer. And I find that so interesting when they do it, that they turn away from the crowd and they turn toward the heartbeat of the
yeah.
band. And so I've thought about trying to do some kind of concept where I'm incorporating those instruments. Um, and, like I just was up there in Canada with Randy Bachman, got that guitar back, his 1957 Gretsch that was stolen out of his hotel room about almost 50 years ago. And he got it back and he's like, "You got to come up here and photograph this guitar." He actually invited me to go to Japan where he did the exchange with the guy who found it. And I already had another plan and I couldn't go to Japan. So he said, "Will you come up to Labor Day weekend? And I'm going to be playing that guitar for the first time because it's never leaving my house again unless I can hand carry it to the gig and back." So that was the case. So he was playing it, and I went up there and photographed it. So that really is the first guitar shoot for the third book, whatever
Wow.
it's going to be. And then I'm working also with the Hard Rock International on some other gems like The Fool, Eric Clapton's The Fool that Todd Rundgren also had, and that amazing EB bass that Mountain had that they used, and some couple of Prince Cloud guitars and
Oh,
a
wow. Cool.
Johnny Cash Guild that has the handwritten. He wrote with a Sharpie on the front. I Walk the Line chorus, and
Yeah.
Bob Marley's 12 string is there, and a Jimi Hendrix burned up guitar. Black Strat is there, and Kirk Hammett's Ouija board Fender is there. I mean, there's gems, gems, gems. A little parlor guitar, Washburn, that Jimi Hendrix used on the opening riff of All Along the Watchtower is there. So, yeah, I've got access, so I'm gonna keep going.
Awesome. So we got more coming from Lisa S. Johnson on the books. Lisa, is there anything that you'd like to leave us? I've bombarded you with questions and stories. Is there anything else you'd like to leave us with?
Oh, you've asked me so many good
I
questions. It's
know.
really been enjoyable chatting with you. Um, just, if you're looking for a nice holiday gift that's for the guitar lover in your life or some music lover in your life, just go to Amazon.ca. In Canada, it's available online on Amazon. And if anyone would like to have a specially signed book, then just send me a direct message on my Instagram account or Facebook account. And I have these custom made little stickers that have the book cover art, which is a skull that's embellished with all kinds of guitar motifs, Gibson SG, and the eyes are the diamond inlay from the Gibson guitar headstock, and the nose is an upside down flying V, and it's really cool to just to stare at the book cover for a while to see what's in.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful book cover, by the way. Beautiful.
And it's got gold leaf on the front, so it
Yeah.
sparkles gold and silver, so it's really kind of sparkly and it looks beautiful. So I have these cool little signature plates that I made that have the book cover art on it, and then there's a little white block where I can sign my name, so I can write to Joe, Lisa S. Johnson on there. So if you just send me a direct message, I'd be happy to send you one of those signed signature plates along with a custom guitar pick that I include. And my social media is at LSJ Rock Photos. That's my Instagram. LSJ, like Lisa Suzanne Johnson, LSJ Rock Photos. That's my Instagram. You can send me a direct message there. And also Facebook as well is the same, LSJ Rock Photos or 108 Rockstar Guitars. It'll come up either way. Um, or Lisa S. Johnson. You just Google that and it'll come up, my Facebook and my Instagram.
I will make sure that all of that is in the podcast notes as well, Lisa, and we're gonna share that with everybody. Thank you so much for chatting with us about your book, Immortal Axes, sharing some of your personal experiences with the artists who own them, their friends, their family members who may have shared them with you. I will have all of your contact information in the podcast notes so you can look at getting your own copy of Immortal Axes. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank you, Guido. Such a pleasure talking to you. I hope I get to meet you in person one day in Toronto.
For sure. Me too.